Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a breaking development that is shaking both Europe and the Middle East. Israel has issued a warning as Italy officially sends a warship to escort humanitarian aid destined for Gaza. This move is creating shockwaves not only in Tel Aviv but also across the wider region, as it represents a bold step by a European power to challenge Israel's blockade and enforce the right of humanitarian assistance to reach Palestinian civilians. The decision by Italy highlights the increasing global pressure on Israel as the Gaza conflict continues to draw international condemnation and new layers of geopolitical involvement. The situation between Israel and Gaza has already been tense for decades, but recent months have seen the violence intensify dramatically. Airstrikes, rocket fire, and ground operations have taken a heavy toll on civilians. International organizations, from the United Nations to Humanitarian NGO, have repeatedly called for aid corridors to be established. Yet Israel has maintained a strict blockade, citing security concerns and the need to prevent weapons from being smuggled into Gaza. This policy, however, has resulted in severe shortages of food, medicine, clean water, and electricity for Gaza's population. Against this backdrop, Italy's decision to send a warship is not just a humanitarian gesture. It is a direct challenge to Israel's enforcement of the blockade. Israel's warning against Italy's naval involvement signals how seriously it views the move. Historically, Israel has reacted strongly to any attempts to bypass or weaken its control over Gaza's access points. In 2010, the Gaza flotilla incident led to deadly clashes when activists attempted to deliver aid by sea. Now, with Italy, a NATO member and a major European state, stepping into the conflict with military assets, the stakes are much higher. Israel fears that this could set a precedent, encouraging other countries to use their navies or military resources to escort aid, effectively undermining Israel's blockade and eroding its regional deterrence. Italy, on the other hand, is framing this decision as a necessary humanitarian intervention. Italian leaders have stated that they cannot sit by while an entire population is starved and deprived of basic necessities. The warship Escort is being portrayed as a measure of protection against potential attacks on aid convoys. This messaging resonates strongly with international audiences who see the suffering in Gaza broadcast daily on global news. Italy is trying to strike a balance between showing solidarity with the Palestinian people while also avoiding a direct military confrontation with Israel. But by sending a naval vessel, Italy has crossed into a domain where symbolic gestures become strategic actions, and Israel is unlikely to let this pass without response. The United States, a close ally of both Israel and Italy, now finds itself in an uncomfortable position. Washington has been steadfast in supporting Israel's right to self-defense and its blockade strategy, but at the same time, it has also been facing criticism for not doing enough to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Italy's move could put pressure on Washington to either back its European ally or reaffirm its commitment to Israel, potentially creating a rift within NATO. This dynamic adds another layer to the already complex alliance politics that surround the Middle East conflict. For Palestinians, the news of Italy's warship escorting aid is being welcomed with hope. Gaza has been described by international observers as an open-air prison, and every attempt to break the blockade is seen as a lifeline. However, Palestinians are also aware of the risks. Israel's naval dominance in the Mediterranean is formidable, and any confrontation at sea could result in escalation, potentially leading to violence that could cost more lives. Still, Italy's intervention has injected a new sense of urgency into the debate about humanitarian aid, raising the question of how far the international community is willing to go to challenge Israel's policies. In Europe, Italy's bold step could inspire other countries to take similar actions. Spain, Ireland, and Belgium have already been vocal critics of Israel's operations in Gaza. If Italy's warship successfully escorts aid without confrontation, it could encourage a coalition of European states to act more assertively. This would mark a significant shift in Europe's role in the Middle East, moving from diplomatic pressure and symbolic gestures to direct operational involvement. For Israel, this is a worst-case scenario, as it could lead to increasing isolation and loss of control over the narrative of the conflict. Israel's warning to Italy is also part of a broader messaging strategy. By issuing a strong statement, Israel is trying to deter not only Italy, but any other state considering similar moves. Tel Aviv wants to reinforce the idea that the blockade is non-negotiable, and that any attempt to breach it will be met with consequences. At the same time, Israel must weigh the risks of taking direct military action against a NATO member's vessel. Any miscalculation could ignite a larger conflict involving European powers, something Israel would prefer to avoid while already managing tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon, unrest in the West Bank, and continued pressure from Iran. The timing of Italy's decision is also significant. The Gaza war has dragged on for months, with casualties mounting and the humanitarian toll worsening. International patience is wearing thin, and the perception of Israel as a state ignoring global calls for restraint is growing. Italy may be calculating that now is the right moment to act, not only to deliver aid, but to set a precedent that Israel's blockade is not untouchable. This approach aligns with Italy's desire to play a bigger role in Mediterranean geopolitics, positioning itself as a humanitarian leader in the region while also projecting naval strength. Meanwhile, reactions across the Arab world are highly supportive of Italy's move. Countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar have been calling for more humanitarian access into Gaza, but their efforts have been limited due to diplomatic complexities and fear of Israeli retaliation. Italy's decision provides political cover for these Arab states to renew pressure on Israel, perhaps through the United Nations or other multilateral forums. In this way, a European intervention could indirectly empower Arab diplomacy, creating a rare moment of alignment between European and Middle Eastern voices on the Palestinian issue. The question now is how Israel will respond in practical terms. Will it attempt to stop the Italian warship from reaching Gaza, or will it allow the aid convoy through while issuing stern protests? Both options carry risks. Confronting the warship could escalate into a dangerous naval standoff that drags NATO into the crisis. Allowing it through, however, could embolden others to do the same, weakening Israel's strategic leverage. The choice Israel makes will have far-reaching consequences for the trajectory of the Gaza conflict and for its relations with Europe. International law also plays a role here. The blockade of Gaza has been criticized by many legal scholars as collective punishment, which is prohibited under humanitarian law. Italy may invoke these legal arguments to justify its actions, portraying the warship escort as not only a moral necessity but also a lawful act under international norms. Israel, however, argues that its blockade is a legitimate security measure under the laws of armed conflict designed to prevent weapons smuggling. This clash of legal interpretations is not just academic, it influences how international audiences perceive the legitimacy of each side's action. The United Nations is likely to be pulled further into this confrontation. Already, UN agencies have been warning of famine conditions in Gaza, with children suffering the most. Italy's action may encourage the UN Security Council to revisit the issue. potentially leading to new resolutions calling for unimpeded humanitarian access. Whether these resolutions can pass without being vetoed by major powers remains uncertain, but Italy's move has already changed the momentum of international diplomacy around Gaza. Another critical factor is public opinion. In Italy and across Europe, public sentiment is increasingly critical of Israel's operations in Gaza. Demonstrations in Rome, Milan, Paris, and London have called for stronger measures to help Palestinians. Governments are under pressure from their populations to take action, and Italy's decision reflects this domestic political reality. For Israel, this trend is concerning as it risks alienating long-standing European partners and shifting Western discourse in favor of the Palestinian cause. From a strategic perspective, Italy's use of naval power to escort aid also sends a signal about the evolving nature of humanitarian intervention. Traditionally, humanitarian efforts rely on NGO, UN agencies, and diplomatic negotiations. By deploying a warship, Italy is merging humanitarianism with military projection. This could become a new model for dealing with crises where access is blocked by military force. If successful, it may set a precedent for other conflicts from Yemen to Sudan, where civilians are similarly cut off by sieges and blockades. Israel's military establishment is undoubtedly weighing its options carefully. The Israeli Navy is highly capable, but engaging with an Italian vessel could spiral out of control. At the same time, Israel cannot afford to appear weak or indecisive, especially when it faces threats from multiple directions. The balance between deterrence and restraint will be crucial in shaping Israel's response. Internal debates within Israel are likely intense, with security hawks advocating a hard line and diplomats urging caution. In the broader Middle East, Iran and its allies are watching closely. Tehran has long supported Gaza politically and militarily, and it may see Italy's intervention as an opportunity to further isolate Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has been in sporadic clashes with Israel, could interpret Italy's move as a sign that the tide of international opinion is turning against Israel, emboldening them to escalate their activities. This demonstrates how a single European warship can have ripple effects across the entire regional security landscape. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains the heart of this crisis. Beyond the politics and military maneuvers, millions of civilians are trapped in dire conditions. Italy's intervention is a response to this human suffering, and regardless of the political outcomes, it has succeeded in drawing attention back to the plight of ordinary Palestinians. For many, this is the most important dimension, ensuring that aid reaches those in need, even if it means challenging powerful actors along the way. Looking ahead, the consequences of this development could reshape the Gaza conflict in profound ways. If Italy succeeds, it will embolden more direct international involvement in humanitarian access, reducing Israel's unilateral control over Gaza. If Israel resists forcefully, it risks igniting a larger confrontation with Europe, adding another front to its already complex security environment. Either outcome will have long-term implications not just for Israel and Palestine, but for the balance of power in the Mediterranean and the future of humanitarian intervention worldwide. This moment represents a critical test of wills between Israel and the international community. On one side, Israel insists on maintaining its blockade as a matter of security and sovereignty. On the other, Italy and potentially other countries are asserting that humanitarian needs override unilateral blockades. The clash between these principles, security versus humanitarianism, will define not only the next phase of the Gaza crisis, but also the global debate on how the world responds to wars that devastate civilian populations. Italy's warship has not only altered the dynamics on the ground, but has also signaled a new chapter in the long and tragic story of Gaza. Whether this leads to greater relief for civilians or to heightened confrontation remains to be seen. What is clear is that the internationalization of the Gaza conflict has reached a new level, and Israel's warnings may not be enough to deter determined states from taking action. The coming days and weeks will reveal whether this bold European intervention becomes a turning point or another escalation in an already volatile conflict.